What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
If you have time and money, let's reject the obvious option, to go to the service. This is for weak people. Strong people go the other way. Pain, disappointment, and financial investment. But in the end, they get the joy of victory over the bolt, and this is worth a lot. Meanwhile, with some investment, this path can be greatly reduced. We are talking about buying an extractor, screwdriver, screwdriver. They call it whatever they want in service centers. It is a tapered drill bit with a reverse thread and a square for a wrench or a screwdriver. To use the extractor is not too difficult, but in addition to it you need to have at least a drill and a metal drill bit, a puncher, and a hammer. If you don't have any of these, it's cheaper to actually go to a service. If there is only no extractor, then you need to remember that when buying it, you cannot save money. Cheap ones break very easily, they are of little use, and it is even more difficult to unscrew the bolt in which the fragment of the extractor is stuck. The sequence of work is obvious. We take a coring tool, mark the place of drilling in the center of the bolt with broken edges and drill a hole for the extractor. If you miss a little bit with the center on the head or a fragment of the bolt, it is not very bad. But it is desirable not to do this, because there is a golden rule of using an extractor. You should always choose an extractor of the largest possible diameter. That is, it is useless to use a 4mm extractor to unscrew a 12mm wheel bolt, especially if the bolt is oxidized. A weak extractor is likely to break. It is better to take a bigger one, for example, 8mm, and here it is important to try to drill as accurately as possible, so that the extractor screws into the bolt, and not into the hub or, more likely, into the wheel disc. It is not necessary to drill deep, 8 to 10mm will be enough. When drilling, it is not necessary to show persistence and burn several drills. It is better to work slowly, taking breaks to let both the drill and the bolt cool down. Local overheating of the disc is not good for you. So, the hole is ready. Now insert the extractor into it and twist it with the collar against the thread of the bolt. Extractor should dig into the remnants of the bolt, and if the latter is not finally oxidized, the operation should end in unqualified success. Unfortunately, the edges usually end up stripped off because the bolt is stuck to the bolt. In this case, the dashka will be no more useful than a prayer, so in order not to break the extractor, you can try to make its task a little easier. For example, while screwing in the extractor, tap the collar with it with a hammer at the moment when it is under load. This at least slightly increases the chances of pulling off the bolt's corroded threads. There is another way to loosen the bolt. Sometimes it is quite effective, although we cannot recommend it because of its wild and frankly illegal nature. It consists in loosening all other bolts and slowly drive a couple of kilometers. One bolt, even badly oxidized, is rarely able to keep the wheel in place. The remaining 3 or 4 bolts, depending on the car, will not let it fall off at all, but to pull the bolt off by the weight of the car and the force acting on the wheel is often successful. Just don't drive a lot and fast. There is a good chance to make the holes in the disc oval with loose bolts, after which it will be almost impossible to center it on the hub. It is necessary to remind one more thing. The extractor is not only in the form of a drill, but also in the form of a head, which can be used to unscrew nuts with slipped edges. Such extractor heads in services unscrew secrets from discs, which lost the key. A quality extractor head is expensive, but if you buy one, it should be exactly the same. A cheap one can easily break. This is not as unpleasant as a broken inside the damaged bolt of the usual extractor, but also to throw away in the wind spent on. A bad head extractor 300 to 500 rubles is also to no avail. In general, the extractor, the best tool to unscrew a bolt with broken edges. The only bad thing is that you cannot buy it cheaply, and often from an economic point of view it will be more profitable to go to the service than to give money for the iron, which will then lie on a shelf in the pantry for several years. Maybe there are other ways, not so expensive, almost free and almost useless unfortunately. Others will be either not very effective or too complicated. The former includes the old method of pounding a smaller diameter head onto the bolt. Yes, sometimes it helps, but before you take a head and a sledgehammer in your hands, you should be prepared to say goodbye to the head at least. It is rare that a head can deform a bolt to its own size without changing its geometry. As a rule, the head will become 17.5 or 18 mm, and the old bolt will be stuck in it, if, of course, it can be unscrewed. But if you have an unnecessary head at hand, why not try? It will not be worse anyway. The second way is to weld something to the head with slipped faces. There are no special rules here. Any iron is welded on which it is convenient to pull off the bolt with a collar or a wrench with. An obscenely long tube on the lever, which many people respectfully call a booster. Of course, few people have a welding machine at home or in the garage, so this kind of help is usually provided in services. And, badly, not always in good ones. Therefore, there is nothing strange in the fact that sometimes in this way not only unscrew the damaged bolt, but also destroy the wheel disc during welding. Let us repeat once again. Local overheating is dangerous for the disc. Besides, in some discs the bolt is buried so deeply that it is simply impossible to get close to it by welding. So this method is not always available. What about the grandfather's method chisel and hammer, which involves putting the chisel at an angle in the direction of unscrewing the bolt along the thread and then striking the hammer to try to unscrew the bolt? In fact, it is not as effective as it seems, and much better when unscrewing not a bolt, but a nut with slicked edges. Although if the bolt is also heated, it is sometimes possible to unscrew it. However, if the faces on the bolt head are destroyed by the tremendous force applied to the cylinder wrench, it is too late to bang on the chisel. It would be more effective to first fill the bolt with liquid key, then knock on it with a chisel, without trying to spoil the edges of the bolt head, and then try to unscrew the bolt with a cylinder wrench. In this case, the chances of success would be greater, but we'll talk about how it should have been later. Finally, if you have a drill and drills, but no extractor, and you don't want to buy one, you can simply drill out the bolt. Although to be blunt, it is not so easy, because sometimes there are bolts of such steel that it takes a long time to drill them out. The main danger is to damage the hub with the drill, so you have to work carefully. Not to spoil well. Now let's return to the question, what should have been done not to rip off the edges of the bolt? The first is not to put cheap tools on them. Using crooked wrenches and rice foil alloy heads is a guaranteed way to destroy the faces of a bolt or nut. The second thing is to tighten wheel bolts to the correct torque. Different manufacturers recommend different torques, but they're usually not much more than 100 Newton meters. Jumping on the tube while tightening the wheel is a bad idea. Good, tighten moderately, and after 50 to 100 kilometers to check the torque and tighten if necessary. Third, lubrication of the bolt. Among not only car enthusiasts, but also professionals, there is no common opinion on the expediency of applying grease to the wheel bolt. There is an opinion that as a result of grease application the bolt will unscrew spontaneously, and the tightening torque will always be wrong, like friction in the grease thread is less, so when tightening the actual torque will always be more than required, and this is very harmful to the thread. Partly these concerns are true, and on new cars it is impossible to find grease on the wheel bolts. It is almost never there. But that's on new ones. In real life, it is better to lubricate bolts or studs. There will be no excessive torque when tightening, the thread will not be damaged, and nothing should unscrew. But there are two important nuances. First, only high-temperature grease should be applied, preferably with more preserving rather than lubricating characteristics. For example, copper or ceramic, but not lithyl or solidal. Secondly, it should be applied only on the threaded part of the bolt, not on the tapered part, which is used to center the disc on the hub. There the friction force is really important, and it is better not to get involved with grease. And it is the thread, not the taper of the bolt or nut, that gets stuck. Therefore, it is necessary to use grease, but wisely. And then the need to buy extractors or dance around a bolt with broken edges tends to zero. In conclusion, successfully removing a wheel bolt with broken edges requires the right tools and techniques. By utilizing welding, extractors, and drills, you can effectively tackle this challenging task. Remember to prioritize safety and take your time to avoid further damage. With patience and the right approach, you can restore your wheel to its proper condition. Thank you for watching, and we hope you found this guide helpful for your automotive repairs.